I mean, we can turn them on so we can hear better, but other than that, it's not connected to this.
Okay. All right. This is Thursday, July 27th at 3 o'clock, special city commission, excuse me, city commission meeting. Roll call, please.
Mayor Pro Tem Duplantis.
Yes.
Commissioner Moya.
Here.
Commissioner Villanueva.
Here.
Commissioner Arias.
Here?
Mayor Litchfield.
Here. Okay, are there any considerations of changes or deletions to the agenda?
No, ma'am?
So I would entertain a motion to accept the agenda as is.
Madam Mayor, I'll make a motion that we approve the agenda as is.
I'll second.
Okay, roll call, please.
Sorry. Commissioner Moya.
Yes.
Commissioner Villanueva. Commissioner Arias.
Yes.
Mayor Litchfield.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Duplantis.
Yes.
I can look, is there anyone signed up for public comments?
I did, I guess it was on the agenda. I didn't realize that.
Okay,
Let me check.
sorry.
It's all right, no problem. No, ma'am, I don't see anything.
Okay, thank you.
Was there a paper there?
No, sir, I don't see one. Where you want to speak?
They have anything they want to say? Basically, hey, look, just, good afternoon, I hope you keep us in your considerations and thoughts as you go through on your deliberations today.
Thank you. I'm blank right now. All right. Next is discussion items. Discussion item A is regarding the fiscal year 21 budget.
21 budget or?
Or 2021.
budget?
Says,
It says-
it says fiscal year 21. So it should be
Should
22.
be 22.
Okay.
It should be 22 also.
Okay,
We'll talk about the final 21 budget later in the agenda.
Yes.
okay, so this is the 22, up here it says 21.
So that, I'll talk about that when we get to the resolution on the 21. So the 22 that we're gonna talk about will be that
Okay,
other, right?
what's the percentage?
20%.
Okay, all right,
Okay.
I see now, okay.
So, as in your email that you received from me, the first tab was with just the $11.50 minimum wage. And that had general fund in a deficit of $505,679. And that was just increasing minimum wage and with a flat budget. The next option is the $11.50 minimum wage, 2% increase for salary, and $1 for all other hourly employees. And a flat budget again, and that put our deficit in general fund $825,509. And I know it's coming up on the next is the amending the finance policy, as we've talked about in the past. With the $11.50 minimum wage by itself, that deficit of $505,679 would put us out of compliance with that financial policy. It would put us at 46%. And we're supposed to be between 15 and 25. And the one giving pretty much everybody some type of a raise would, and the deficit being at $825,509, that would put us at 38%. So we're still over. I did a little playing around with the numbers, and pretty much I would have to almost show $1 million deficit to get below the 25% if that policy stays in place. I do see a note on my spreadsheet here from when, because this just carried over from previous finance director. And he even has a note on here that he reduced the contingency for emergencies to $400,000 to maintain cash minimum. So he also was trying to stay within those percentages. So that policy really puts me between a rock and a hard place. Because if it stays in place, then we're gonna show a huge deficit and DFA is not gonna be happy with us. If we amend it, then we can have a higher cash reserve. So the other one that I worked on was the one with the percentage cuts. And that one put our deficit down to 417,617 just for the general fund. But that still puts us at 57%.
And that's without raising the cap or whatever it is that we're.
That's without raising the cap. So again, if that financial policy stays in place or remains between 15 and 25%, we're gonna have to show a bigger deficit. So, and actually I will go back, when we go back on fiscal year 21, if we did want to talk about that one, we showed favorable overall. I don't know if I wrote it down or not, I'm gonna have to. We ended the year favorably, which is great news, overall, for the whole city at favorable 2.6 million. And so because we showed such a high favorable, some of that cash went into general fund, and that is why we would have to show a huge deficit based on that financial policy. Because now we've increased our revenue, or our cash reserves based on that, and now we have to bring it back down for that policy. Does that make sense?
So are you saying first thing we need to do is probably amend the financial policy?
That's something that we probably need to discuss if that's a way that the commission wants to go. It's the very first resolution on the agenda. But in talking about it, that's why I'm bringing it up so you guys will know why it's important that we amend that.
Okay.
With that in place, we will never be able to accrue any kind of cash reserves in general fund with that debt.
So what's, if you don't mind me asking, what do we want to amend it to?
So I reached out to the city attorney and received a response this morning. And what I would recommend is having a minimum of what we've carried over before, at least 15%. I kind of lean on Rochelle, seeing if that needs to be increased as a minimum. As far as the max, I asked the attorney if there's a cap. He stated he is not aware of any legal caps on how much can be in reserves. So I feel we can either leave it open-ended or we could set something a little bit higher. That'd be up to the commission. But I think a cap of 25% is quite low. We'll never get to where we need to be if we continue to practice like that. And again, I think he recommended, there's two things in question. There's no caps that he's aware of. The first issue is to see the amount of reserves that is optimum for maintaining a good bond rating. And second, was a little bit more political to balance the needs of the community and make sure that there are not too many unsatisfied community needs. That caused folks to question why the city is sitting on large reserves. I don't think it's that large. I think it's misleading when we go to our budget. It's not like we have an overabundance of funds. These funds, once we're able to bring the budget back down closer to a flat budget, I think to a balanced budget, a zero budget, would be ideal. And that's where we could take some of this money and put it back into our departments, into our employees. The equipment that we need, when people say, well, we have concerns of potholes, well, what can we do if we don't have the right equipment? But how can we afford that equipment if we don't have money to provide for that? So it all starts first, I think, with this policy, because if not, then we're going to be in $1 million deficit, which.
And again, DFA is not gonna be happy with that at all. So the fiscal year 21 cash for general fund ended at 2.2 million. That's the cash reserves for general fund. So that's what's gonna roll over for fiscal year 22. Oh wait, no, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, wrong number. We actually ended with 3.2 million, almost 3.3 million. And that's before the state required reserve of 112. So I understand the point of the policy, that financial policy, and it is so that we're not just sitting on all this money in general fund, because then it almost makes it look like we're not putting money back out into the community. But the other problem is that now with this large reserve there, then I have to show a huge deficit. So NDFA is the one that keeps bringing it up every time they give us a letter. You're depleting your cash reserves, because they're looking at the budget. And again, when we talk about budget, so that everybody understands, we are talking about a projection. So if everything went the way we're saying, and we say we're gonna get all this money and we're gonna spend all this, then this is where we would be, right? So we would potentially be in a deficit. So let's just say in a worst case scenario, we don't change the finance policy and I show $1 million deficit, and that really happens. That's $1 million that's coming out of that cash reserves out of general fund. So that's what they're looking at as far as DFA, and exactly like Mark's saying, sometimes our debt loan companies, they look at that and they want to see where we're sitting. And sometimes that doesn't look good. It doesn't look good that water, to me anyway, the water department has almost a bigger cash reserve than general fund. And general fund is the one that has to supplement every other department should they come up short. So if something were to happen, for example, with wastewater, with their whole infrastructure project that they have coming out, and they're gonna need some extra money, it would come from general fund, but we may not have it if we continue on without any reserves. And if we have other departments that need equipment, like Mark's saying, which we know we do, we can't do it because we don't have anything set aside for that.
Well, we have emergency situations that happen all the time. Look at it, a couple of weeks ago, we had a high pressure sewer main go down. That was an emergency call over the weekend. That was $58,000 just to repair it. So Calvin has his money on the wastewater side, but like I said, for the emergency contingency fund or other places where we have to tap into it, we have to account for that. We have to account that the city shuts down again, and we have to be able to pay payroll and keep things open. So with that being said, I mean, this policy needs to be amended to some extent. To what extent, I leave that on the commission. That's your all's decision to create.
Maybe bump up the minimum, not have it quite so low, because 15%, it is pretty low.
I think that's the bare minimum we have to per the DFA, correct? Like you said with the 112. So to give you all a reference point, we're on page 7 of 18 at the bottom where it says fund and balance reserve policy. Paragraph 2, that's the main area where we're discussing.
So DFA requires a 112. It's in here.
On this.
DFA requires 112 and it automatically comes up. So whenever I enter all of our numbers into their system, it automatically calculates that and sets it to the side. So like I'm saying, if we're ending with 3.2 million in general fund, it's already setting aside a reserve of 300,000. So a reserve of 300,000, so 112, if I remember correctly, it's been a little while since I've actually looked at it. I believe that should be the equivalent of 3 months. 112, 1 month, $300,000. If everything went south, that's what that reserve is there for.
Which that doesn't go very far. 200,000. We maybe be able to do payroll and
Once,
utilities.
maybe?
It's not very much if everything goes south.
So what's y'all recommendation on what we should move it up to?
If not 15%, what do you recommend?
I would say a minimum to set the bar at B20, and I wouldn't cap it.
Not for right now, and then we can always come back and amend it again once we can get the budget back to a balanced budget. Then I would think we could come back and cap it at that point once we see how that's going.
Another question that the attorney had was, if we have engaged in bond counsel or financial advisor. I know previously we had worked with a financial advisor, and
GSK, wasn't it?
I think That's, they changed names after that.
Yes.
But I would like to potentially look into that option. But I think for the sake of time, we can leave it uncapped since there's no legality behind it, according to our city attorney. And then based on what's best for business operations, maybe reach out to that financial advisor and say, where should we put a cap on this?
I agree. I agree. And I also, so going back also on the end of fiscal year 21, I do want to say that every department did have savings. So everybody was watching their budget and staying within, which is great. And I'm very proud of all the department heads.
COVID did help as well in the sense that we didn't have travel per diem as much. So that is something we're gonna have to account for this next year. There's certain requirements, certain entities are starting to meet in person again. It was beneficial to have some of these meetings online, as painful as it was at times. It did save per diem costs, wear and tear on vehicles, tires, you name it. So that's also factored into the savings. I don't imagine that big of a savings for future fiscal years unless we're shut down again, but that's something we gotta be aware of as well. That did contribute to part of those savings.
All right, what else?
One other thing that I wanted to point out also was the airport, and I actually think it was airport, MAP, and co-op, those three projects. When we talk about not going into negative cash, those funds are actually combined together in the DFA system, and they actually went into negative cash. So on top of the other normal transfers that we have every year from general fund, I had to move 190,000 from general fund down to cover those. And then once we get the reimbursement in this fiscal year, then we can pull it back. But as of right now, I had to cover that because it did take that fund into negative cash. That was the only one that we had that issue with. And again, that's just because we haven't received the reimbursement.
And those are some of the strings attached that, yes, although they may be grant funds, we still have to float that until we are reimbursed, and still it's a hit against our budget.
When will we be reimbursed for that?
I don't know. I would hope some soon, yes, I hope so.
And most of that is out of our hands. Most of that's federal requirements, and it's pretty painful to go through all the processes and get everything signed off on and finally get that money to trickle back down.
And if you remember, the airport one was the 100% grant.
Right.
It was at $3 million. But see, this is what happens when it goes into the next year. We're still gonna have to cover it until we get that reimbursement back, so.
It's apples and oranges, but that's why I brought up what I did the other night with the federal funds, the American Relief Funds. Just because we're receiving 1.197, they're gonna do it in 2 distributions. About half of that now, then another 12 months, which will be another fiscal year, we'll get the rest. So
Yeah.
if we have emergency projects, which we do for infrastructure with the lift station, emergency water line bore underneath the railroad tracks, we may have to float that. Like Rochelle said, we cover that upfront cost, and we may not get reimbursed till 12 months later. But an emergency is an emergency, we can't put it off.
Now, also, there were, I don't wanna say some frivolous spending at the end of the year, but I have said that before, a lot of departments will wait till the end of the year to spend
Right.
some money. I did see a lot of them come in right at the very end. So when we start talking about fiscal year 22 and we start talking about these percentage cuts, some of those are the way they are because of that reason. So, because if you're just gonna spend it frivolously, then maybe you didn't need that much money.
And again, going back to my previous comment, some of that excess amount of cash still available at that time in their budgets was probably because they're moving it from per diem or training or whatnot, because they didn't utilize those funds at that time because no one was traveling. But if it was something necessary that was absolutely needed, they needed this certain tool or equipment to complete something, that's understandable, but spending it just for the sake of it's there, that's not good
I was gonna
practice.
say, did they need it before the end of the year? So
Exactly.
maybe we could I don't know if when you have your meetings, if you could stress to them, if this is something you really need, get it ordered and don't wait till the end and just spend the money to be spending the money.
Well, and another thing that I know the state does when it comes to the senior citizen funds, for the senior center, we've approved it in previous commission meetings. They will evaluate that sometimes, I don't know if it's quarterly.
I
or
believe they
semi-annually.
started doing it quarterly now.
And we may look at that you have this amount through this first quarter, and if you're not using it, we take it back, we save it, and
I think that's a good idea.
maybe time
personally.
to approach this a different way.
I do remember when I first started, a lot of the departments actually had capital outlay money in each department. And there again, at the very end of the year, then they'd go buy something just to spend it so they wouldn't lose it. And then previous finance director Benny was like, no, we're just gonna move it, which is why I think it's in executive, there's the 100,000 of capital outlay money, and it's for that, so that when they do need something and they don't have the money for it, then they come talk to the city manager, make sure that it's a legitimate purchase, and then we approve it and move those funds at that point.
How much have we each year been budgeting for, and I call it non-essential training unless it's for certification? How much money have we been budgeting for per diem and non-essential training?
It varies from department to department. It depends, I don't think we classify it as essential or non-essential, it's just one line, it's either travel per diem or training or whatnot. And that's something we've talked about recently, that whether it's weighted differently for more essential departments, there is training that's mandatory, certain departments have CEUs that they have to have those, a minimum amount throughout the year. And others is maybe just to better the training and to allow the employees to do their job a little bit better. One thing that I'd like to see, I've been approached by a gentleman that helps with some customer service training. It's cheaper, it's done online now instead of in person when people are having to travel. It's very cost effective. I believe we can never have enough customer service training. Just, it's being more creative and more efficient with the funds we have, I think. And like you said, cutting out some of that maybe non-mandatory training and focus on the stuff that's very essential that we
Well,
have.
if we can take that money and put it aside, if there is a training that comes up, I know, I think it's the water department, they do need certain certifications and stuff like that. Of course, we leave that as it is, but if there's something that does come up, then that money's not allocated already. We don't have to go through the bars or anything. Am I correct on that? We've got the money already set aside, and it can be used for, it gives us more for those. It doesn't take it out of the system, but it doesn't obligate it to someplace else at that point. You know, because you can't spend it if it's obligated. You gotta go to,
Public works, water, wastewater, sanitation, they all have requirements. Police department, EMS, they all are required to meet a certain CEUs throughout a year or two. It depends, it varies through departments as well. And that's the stuff, like I said, is essential. We need to maybe dial back on some stuff that may be waste, and that's something that Michelle put together percentages, and I mean,
And I thought about that also when looking at the percentages. Some of these departments that may have had travel and per diem in their budget, maybe you don't get to go to as many trainings or you attend them online.
well, after we had that one meeting and we had discussed the 5%, some of that 5% was just some training. It wasn't cutting employees. It wasn't taken away from equipment. A lot of it came down to, it was just some training, and it's training that could be done online, which does save, because I'm not a big online learner, but, it does help on that. And, when I looked at that, I was like, well, that's actually in a better direction than having to go and cut employees.
and it definitely helps, but it's not gonna make up the entire deficit.
No, but it puts us in, as long as we're going in the right direction, we're not gonna be zero budget this year, but we can definitely be going in the right direction. If we practice this for the next year to 2 years, maybe 3, we could be in a very good position.
Exactly.
So how do we go about implementing, like, if you haven't spent the first quarter, if you've got leftover money like they do at the senior citizens, how do we go about implementing that?
Well, so what we can do what I would do is have meetings then after the end of the first quarter, so that would be in October, and sit down with the department heads and just go over their budget and say, you know, you're here, but we would expect you to be here, so if you're not really gonna spend this, then maybe we need to start looking at pulling some of this money back. And that is exactly what they do at the senior center from the state level. They are questioning everything that they get.
That's a good idea.
Well, and possibly, the last 2 weeks, anything that's gonna be bought should be approved.
Right,
So we don't have frivolous spending at the end, trying to, well, we don't wanna lose this whatever amount of dollars. I think the last 2 weeks, it should have to be an approval basis. Okay, we want to buy this. Okay, well, I understand we need these valves to do it, you know, type deal. But, you know, I'm using this example because when I was in the military, all of a sudden I got these funky looking gloves, and it was because they were trying to spend money at the end of the fiscal year. I never wore them. You know, it was just some weird mountain stuff when I was in North Carolina.
Well, and then back to the trainings also, there are some where they will go and register the employee to go to the training. And then it comes to Mark to approve for the travel and per diem, but you've already registered them
Mhm.
without even asking or making sure that it was a legit training. And we've had that several times, so maybe that also has to be changed in that before they even get registered, they have to have the permission.
I think that'd be a good internal policy to create.
yes, I do too.
Unfortunately, I have already, based on budget concerns, had to cut back on some trainings that may not be mandatory. Again, I've always been a supporter to try to get our employees trained to the fullest extent, but in budget crunch, we have to do what we have to. And there have been at least 2 or 3 trainings that have been canceled.
Well, you know, it comes down to a choice. Do we want to cut people, which is going to hurt our services to our community? Or if it's something, and I hate to say it, as simple as training to improve an employee a little bit better, we have other avenues we can take at that right now. And it's not a permanent thing, but if I had to cut something first, I would cut non-essential training and per diem. Save on the use of our vehicles, that way they can stretch a little farther. Gas is extremely high right now. That's another cost that goes into these. And with gas being high, I can tell you right now, the hotel rooms are expensive. Some of these places, if they go to Hobbs or Albuquerque, they're paying you $150, $200 a night. And then per diem is running, what, $75 a day?
85.
85? So
Unless
you
go
take
to
that
Santa Fe.
3 to 5 days, you take that 3 to 5 days, not counting the training. I calculated for one person going was $3,000, not counting the training.
Wow,
And that was a 1 week training.
that's 85 if you go actual per diem. So if you do actuals.
But it's the actual expense.
Right.
So, yeah,
It
so
could be more.
it's, and then you throw in a training, which probably is on the average of $7,000 to $10,000. Now you take 10 of those, we just saved $100,000. If it's if it's something that's not going to give a certification, you know, if it's just and hey, you know, we can do extra studying online. There's things that we can get online for pennies on the dollar, pretty much. I hate to go in that way because sometimes I think the hands-on experience and the training is valuable, but our balanced budget's more valuable right now. We've got a lot of entities depending on us and a lot of our citizens depending on this.
Well, and like I said in one of the previous meetings, the last one I was at, when we talked about doing the percentages, and it's gonna be up to the department head where they're gonna wanna take that cut from. So if, for example, you get cut 5% in your fund, you're gonna have to tell them where you're gonna cut that 5% from.
Because being a part of working for the city for many years, going up to the different departments, there's certain departments where their per diem and training line is pretty slim. It could be anywhere from only $500 to $1,000.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for them, that's not gonna make up that 5% difference. So are they gonna have to cut office supplies? Are they gonna have to cut down on, what else can you cut down? I mean, it's gonna be tough.
But using the office supplies, it's not I know at one point, and it was Rochelle that made the comment, why are we making all these copies? Which is a good point. You know, I've got a total of 3 printers, well, actually, one's yours, between everywhere I go, you know. This is something that I've basically volunteered for. You know, this isn't something I was forced to do. So in my opinion, it should be, I don't mind doing up my copies. And Angelica does send me, sometimes she sends me my stuff over the email. But, you know, there is a way, you know, managing, it's not necessarily cutting your office supplies. It's, again, it comes down to inventory. what are we going to, do I need that bulk of sticky notes? Do I need 4 cases of paper, or is one gonna get me through for 2 weeks? Things of that nature. I know here at the courthouse, y'all go through paper a whole lot more, but, say at the cemetery, they may go through a case a month, but that's, and I don't know that for sure, but that's where inventorying and not just, purchasing from SPC a big bulk of office supplies, that just comes down to, I'm sure all of our guys have got discipline, but that's where we just gotta,
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up. That's why we have these.
Yeah.
We just have to, it's a team effort and we're all gonna have to jump on board. I mean, I could save a lot of reams of paper just on commission packets.
And paper's not
I need
cheap.
paper. I need paper. You just need-
Yeah,
But I mean, between running off the copies themselves for that, I mean, it adds up. The copy cost for us renting and leasing our copiers, plus the cost of paper as well. I mean, it gets expensive.
well, and not necessarily, I don't want to use the word prove, but if you're gonna order something that's kind of frivolous, you need to be able to show how is it gonna help your department, not just I'm trying to spend money, and, because I know we had to do that in our classroom. If we were budgeted so much money to spend on different things, then you had to be able to show how you were gonna use that, how it's gonna benefit your classroom, instead of just ordering to be ordering.
I agree.
So,
And cutting that 5% doesn't take that 5% from them. It's just giving them a more limited base to, go ahead and purchase from. Because that money it's just, we're not gonna obligate that money out to the point that if this department does have an emergency, now we have to go to a commission meeting and vote to move money around and all that other stuff, which is not a problem to do, but if we've got that money already sitting there, like I said, we're not cutting them actually out, we're just.
Well,
And that's, yes, that is, go ahead, Mark.
I'd lean on you for your advice, Michelle, but I think that some of those funds that we save, cutting across the board like that, could go into the emergency contingency fund, something that is already in the system that's budgeted for, we don't need to spend all of it.
So- I can't, so the numbers that are in what I have prepared with the percentage cuts, that would be their actual budget numbers, so it's just a matter of decreasing something somewhere along the lines. But, exactly like you're saying, Mayor Pro Tem, is that if you're a general fund department, or you're supplemented by general fund, at the end of the day, if something comes up and you have to have it, something happens, your roof collapses and we've got to fix the roof, it's gonna happen. And at that point is when we're gonna go back and look at, it will, if we end up in the deficit, it's gonna come out of the cash reserves. That's why it's there. But at the same time, we're trying to build it up to have it so that we can start budgeting and buying equipment. But just setting up a budget and increasing it
right.
because you spent this amount of money this year, so I'm gonna give you the same amount of money again this year, is kind of why it's so high. And instead of like saying no, okay, so you have, and I remember we did this, I think 2 years ago, we didn't do this last time. But we went with each department head and said, okay, you had $500 in office supplies, but in previous years you only had 2. Why are you at 500? What are you buying? So we have had those conversations.
I think
a
we did
lot
that
of
last
them-
time I was active, that was probably 2017, 2018.
And I think a lot of department heads, and I don't wanna say this mean, but, they're used to it, and so they need it. And we really can't. We
Something
don't
I've
have it.
learned in businesses, when I'm asking why it was spent, it was too late,
Right,
Exactly.
so.
no, you need to show.
Well, that was
we
in
have
budget
Yeah.
recommendation, so then it said, yes, why did you go from 200, and all of a sudden you're at 500? What did you buy? And do you need it again? Well, yeah, I need it. No, but you really don't. You can do it 200, you don't need 500. That was a one-time thing.
If we had done that, we compared it to historic trend in the past, like you said, but also we gotta account for inflation. Everything has gone up. Fuel prices are going up, so that means delivery charges are gone up. Our supplies have gone up, so it's.
I will tell you one thing that went down.
What?
Was the Excel lighting, when they put in all those new lights. We actually had some savings in there.
Good.
It was very nice on the street side.
Mhm.
It was very nice. So, I don't know if you guys have any more questions about 21. I talk about it more when we get to the resolution. But if you have any specific questions about 21? Commissioner Moy is being very quiet today.
I can hear something moving.
You still there, Commissioner Moya?
Yeah, I can finally hear it. We have a bad connection, so I'm trying to do the best I can, you know.
Yes, sir.
What we have to be very careful is make sure that, if we do cost and some of the extras that they need, and then we can readjust those budgets at the end of the quarterly, if they need it, you know. So some of the supplies can be readjusted and actually make the budget look a little better. And then increasing it to 20% would be probably the best area to go with, you know, the 20. I think that would be one of the areas. It's really hard because if you look, I was looking at the whole tax roll and everything that I have here. And it doesn't look, it looks like it went down last year, all the paperwork that you guys gave me. So that's about all I can say. It's really hard right now because of the way the revenue is coming into the community, from property tax to gross receipts tax to all the other taxes that are coming in. We've got a lot to decide on this mess, you know. My recommendation is just try and make it a very conservative budget at this point, you know. And if we have to come back and adjust it, then we'll do that. But certainly we don't want to look too overly not balanced at the end of the day. You have to look good for the state. The state auditor has to look at it and have to really agree that that's a good budget for the community to operate on. But we also have to have enough leeway to be able to work with it. That's all.
Okay. All right. We'll go over 22 now.
Do you want to talk about the percentage cuts then?
I'd like to know more about.
Yeah.
what we can do.
So, as I said, next to each fund name, so for example, legislative, I have a 2. That would mean that that fund got a 2% cut.
Okay.
And so what I'm cutting it from is I'm looking at the budget with the $825,000 deficit, which is with all the raises. So originally legislative budget, when I look at the fund expenditures, not the transfer, but the fund expenditures, was at $511,090. And cutting that off took it down to $500,868. So it took off about $11,000 from legislative with the 2%. So that's what each one of those numbers mean. So it was, and again, I put numbers in, and if you, as the commission, feel like I need to change them and you want to decrease or increase, then we can do that. So legislative was a 2%, executive is a 2%, finance is a 2%. I didn't touch code enforcement because that is strictly salaries. There's nothing else in that line. That's all that is. So I didn't, that's why there's no number next to that one. Judicial was 5%. Animal control is 5%. Police is 7%, which I know police is an essential. But taking into account that they no longer have the canine dog, he'll no longer have his overtime. So there's some of that was part of my thought process of that particular line. Parks was 5%. Cemetery is 2%. Streets is 2%. Library is 3%. Community development is 5%. Museum was 7%.
Okay, what does that include, the 7% on that one?
So for museum, my understanding was there was gonna be a change in the personnel mark, correct?
We've been discussing that.
Well, and there was something I brought up to Mark today when we were talking at noon.
Okay.
If we don't have someone over there, how's it gonna stay open?
similar to the other two museums, and I know we've heard comments from both sides on that, but the other museums are 100% volunteer. So with that being said, my opinion, I think it needs to be open more than it is now anyhow. Maybe a little bit more, better hours, and kind of cater more to the tourists. But again, we discussed that previously, why we felt it was necessary. So we look at the whole scheme of things of this whole budget, and we have to cut something somewhere. I mean, we discussed that over and over again. So you start looking at your priorities, a little bit more central places. Where do we cut?
Let me just go back real quick. So, because, I know the audience doesn't know the numbers, you hear 7%, it sounds very high. Their budget with the raise went to 39,302. With the 7% took it to 36,551. So it's $3,000 is what we're looking at.
That's what we're cutting, $3,000.
And I want to point out, and again, I don't know if it has to do with the hours, or COVID, but the museum's budget for revenue was $7,500, what we would expect them to bring in, and we got $3,172. So,
I imagine that was COVID though. That's what I would think. I just hate for us to leave it not managed. You know what I'm saying? And I know we're gonna take care of the one that's over there now and make sure she has a job and everything. But I don't know, I hate to see our historical museum left bare like that.
You know, I'm good with volunteers, but that is a tough area right now. I do, you know, seeing at the Railroad Museum, they struggled, they've got the volunteers, but there was a time that they had one, then they had none, then they had one, then they had none. Luckily, right now they have, well, right now it's 3, but one works at Main, you know, she works in
Right.
there, so,
Again, you asked for suggestions, I made
No, no, no.
suggestions.
No, I
that's
know you are, but
And it's based on essential prioritizing it. It's not a popular decision. I don't like having to make that decision either. But if we want to make up that difference, we're gonna have to cut it somewhere else. So now I'm gonna ask for y'all, if you want to keep that, then we gotta cut somewhere else. And just on salary alone, we're looking at $19,000. So at least $19,000 has to be cut from somewhere else.
so we can go ahead and continue with, if you don't mind, right?
no.
not at all,
Right.
but let's, if y'all may go down. Recreation, was cut 2%. And I didn't go hard on that one because I know that also is another, and Mark was wanting to do the kids' sports again.
Yes.
So, taking out, the, like, chemical supplies and pool maintenance line, taking some of that money into consideration. So this one, and by doing that, it also reduced the amount of the transfer. So again, that is what offsets from general fund. So it, cutting some of the expenses, cuts the amount that we have to transfer because of the salaries and everything else in there. I didn't put anything on senior citizens because it's a contract, it's $62,111, that's all we give them. And the rest of it is all the money that they get from the state and the federal level. And besides, like she said, it was to pay for the chargebacks and, I believe some insurances. The airport, I cut 4%. And then we have the internal service, which I put in 5% on carpenters, but I don't know if that's realistic or not.
On carpenters.
Now, these departments, they all get charged to every single fund. But by reducing it, it also helps general fund. Because then it lowers an expense for every single department in general fund.
What if we did a convention center out for RFP?
So I'm still planning on doing that. We have a few big events coming up that I don't want to shortchange, so in the interim, I want to maybe just do contract hire just as needed to fill those event spots until we can get the full-blown RFP. The kind of catch with that is, honestly, it's not as big of a hit because that's coming out of lodger's tax.
Exactly.
So lodger's tax has their continual funds come in, and where that hurts us is, for example, towards the beginning of last year, through the end of the calendar year where lodger's tax was down. So we didn't get that income that we projected. We're hoping to do better than we did. So yes, that helps, but in all honesty, lodger's tax is pretty self-sufficient.
Isn't the convention center completely taken out of the executive part of the larger staff?
Promotional.
Promotional commissioner,
The convention, operation and maintenance comes out of promotional, and the capital outlay comes out of executive.
Yeah, but now we're almost paid off, aren't we? If we pay that out, then that's.
Oh, the loan is paid off, yes. Yes, the loan is paid off, and, actually, speaking about that, we actually got, I wanna say it was $142,000 back from NMFA, now that that loan closed, so,
That's how much we got back, or what?
yes.
yes, which is
So
nice.
actually, the convention center is not impacting the general fund anyway.
No,
No,
it's
sir.
not. Mhm.
It stands on its own funds, you know what I'm saying, so, you know.
Correct, and that's, again, even though we have those,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
but even though we have that $142,000 back, there's 2 emergency roof repairs we have to do, which has already.
Oh, no, I understand that part, but I'm looking at the fact is that you don't have to worry too much with the convention center because it's been because it generates its own money out of the lodger stuff. And now with the convention center being paid off, we can utilize that money to get that convention center up to shape and generate more revenue as a spin-off industry for the city to carry to bring in more conventions and other things. So that looks good for them, but, you know, we're looking more at the general budget right now and how we're gonna balance that one out.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And then also remember that, the transfer to dispatch also increased from last year originally.
Substantially.
So that's another added one that, and did you say it was gonna stay that same amount, Mark?
I've actually heard that it may potentially go up next year, even more than it did this year.
I got a question with that.
Dispatch.
They were supposed to have been, from my understanding, by now, self-sufficient.
Will be on yours.
So based on our JTA, which was just approved last meeting, I mean, it's split up. They have funding, I don't remember exactly where they take it out of on their end, but they pay with that fund initially, any excess, then goes split up between the city, the county. We pay the bulk of it, 45 for us, 45 for the county, and then the additional 10% for the other entities.
I know when I was doing the budget for them about 5 years
You
ago,
see 31,000?
all those, board members were all sitting there saying, okay, well, this is supposed to be headed in the direction of us being self-sufficient by now. This is 5 years later after they told me that when I was the director.
Well, and they've
So I'm kind of
encouraged,
curious, why is it going up when it's supposed to be going in the other direction?
they've incurred some large expenses. I know one thing is the new CAD software they purchased, that was a large expense. Any increases, the goal, and I'm not saying this is factoring to the cost, the goal now is to eventually go to digital instead of analog. That'll be a substantial increase when that happens. But the bulk of it, to my knowledge, is everything needed to get the new software and put things in place. I also know that, as repairs come up with repeaters and whatnot, I mean, that things get expensive. I also know they had a contract, and I still believe they do with Plateau. So that increased in cost as well for their side.
How many CAD systems have they gone through in the last 5 years? Because I know I put one in while I was there.
I think one after you were there, to my knowledge. But it's, yeah.
I'm sure it's a good one. You know, I
It is.
did a lot of research on a lot of those, but they had put one in before I was there. They weren't happy with that, so we got another one in there, and I want to say it's been 2 now. Because they're putting in another one right now. They put in one after I left.
So it may be the one that when, after you left, but it was, like I said, it was a big chunk.
Yeah.
And everything's going up on prices, unfortunately, like I said, so don't see any decreases in the future. If anything, things will probably go up. And we're just trying to be proactive, like I said,
Yeah.
avoid that compression. We're trying to be practical and as efficient as possible, and those that carry a certification for their job. I mean, it's public record, I don't want to get into it too much, but we have certain employees making $15 an hour, and our EMS crews are making minimum wage. That's not good for morale. That's why we can't retain anyone.
Yeah.
So it's a management call where do we step in and try to make things right, make things better to retain our employees? If not, we're not gonna attract anybody to fill these vacancies.
Well, one suggestion I could make, since everything's going up in compression, is our rent to the dispatch going up? Because that's part of our payment is our in-kind.
I agree. That's something we can discuss. To my knowledge, we kept it flat, but that's something we can look into.
They're raising their prices, I guarantee a lot of landlords are raising theirs. Our utilities are going up over there, I know. Mine went up. Insurance is going up over there too, so they've got to cushion that cost as well. And like I said, I'm all for the dispatching and everything, but fair is fair. We've got a city to run, and if they're going up on what we got to pay them, well, they're utilizing our facilities. Therefore, that means we've got to incur something. That happens with restaurants, our food goes up, our prices have to go up, our labor goes up, things of that nature.
Michelle, when you stepped out, are we contractually bound to keep the rent that we relay over to dispatch the same, or are we allowed to increase periodically?
That I don't
Not
know.
sure.
I don't think I've ever seen the contract with dispatch. I'm not sure. But they do pay rent, but you're right, we probably,
Things go up.
I don't know if I need to know it.
Just a suggestion.
So they pay rent and they pay their light bill. That's all they pay. to us.
Okay, their electricity, you said.
So, any thoughts? Let me change some numbers.
So you said that these percentage cuts, that would put us on a deficit of 417, 617?
Yes.
So it cuts it in half.
Almost in half, yes.
And that does give the 2% plus dollar, correct?
Yes.
Well, you did mention that the carpenter fund by 5%, you did not see that as realistic. Why was that?
Oh, I never even talked to Mark about it. I kind of just put it in there, but I didn't know.
It's, yeah, there's gonna be some things that it'll be tough, but we may not even be able to meet these. If it's good for budget, and we could reassess later, but some of these may not be realistic. If something comes up, we're gonna have to pay it, obviously. For the sake of getting the budget submitted, that's where it's at now.
The warehouse has previously been cut. It used to be a full-time position. Then, when we had Lucille there, and then we cut it back down to 30%. So as a warehouse, that's 30% of a salary.
So-
And minimizing their expenses also in that budget.
We have been proactive throughout even the last year, in an effort not to have to cut. And nothing's personal, we're not cutting people, we're cutting positions. And what we did, I think, pretty efficiently, and it's hurt us in other places, it's hard, people having to pick up slack, but there are numerous positions we cut throughout the last year. There's numerous positions the year prior to that we cut. And we waited as something became vacant, we just didn't fill it because we knew realistically we couldn't. And that's why it's important to come together and have these meetings to decide, we have to make up that deficit, where do we start? Because in my opinion, I enjoy progress. I think getting down to a $400,000 deficit is amazing, but we're chipping away at it. Next year, we need to cut that in half and eventually work towards that balanced budget.
So with percentage cuts tab, does that include, with the amended financial policy, play an impact on that final number?
If the commission changed and did away with the cap, then that would put us at the 57%. It's the number next to the word general, that's what that number is. So that's taking the total amount of expenditures. So you would add in the operating transfer of that 763, 67, and all of the fund expenditures. And you take that number and then divide it by your cash, your ending cash balance.
Well, I'd hate for us to pass something that looks good on paper, but that we can't logically follow. I mean, you pass the budget with the intent to follow it, right?
What do you think, Rochelle? Is it practical? Is it realistic to meet these? I mean, it's gonna be tight. It really is.
So if you want, let's look at executive, for example. So executive finished, that fund started the fiscal year of 21 with a budget of $621,927. At the end of the year, the total expenditures was $406,635. Executive, I propose them to be at $607,565. So is that realistic?
Well, the numbers you just read off, we don't have on our end, right?
You do not.
Say it one more
I
time.
can get them for you if you want. If you'll give me a second, I'll run a report for you.
I can visualize a lot of things, the numbers aren't one of them.
I'm the same way.
Every math teacher since first grade can attest to that.
One second.
So Mayor, and Mayor Pro Tem, you're suggesting that we leave the position at the museum?
That's what I'd like to see, but,
And so that would take away that 7% cut, is that what I understand correctly?
no.
I think that was, so I guess we have to talk about that. Was that salary even included in that, or is that already cut and then there's a 7% on top of that?
So the salary is still in there.
Okay.
So this definitely, the position's not necessarily cut,
Exactly.
just the budget, that's, which is
Right,
what
the
I was
budget.
trying to, whenever I brought up the cutting down, bring it down to the departments to decide how that money's gonna be.
And refresh my memory, what are the current hours out there?
Well, they're gonna move her to the library. She worked part-time, right, at the
It'd
library.
be still 20 hours a week, it would just be at the library versus the museum. Again, my goal, it's not personal, it's not picking on
No,
people,
no,
it's
I
an
know
effort
that.
to make the budget work for locations. But that position is paid very well for what the job scope requires. And again, it's just in an effort to be more efficient. My biggest concern is not ruining people's lives. I don't want to cut them completely. They need to have
Right.
funds to survive. So to me, it's more important to make sure she had a job versus full-time staffing or part-time staffing at the museum. Again, I know that's an asset. We market that. If it wasn't an asset, we wouldn't market it. So I know what that means to the community. I support it 100%. It's just, I know whether it's ideal, and I know the other museums struggle themselves. I know what the Historical Museum brings maybe to the table more than the others, but where do we start? It was just a suggestion. It's something that we need to consider. And like I said, ultimately it's up to the commission.
Commissioner Moya, do you want me to send this report to you by email?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Do you want me to send this report to you by email so you can see where each department finished with their budget for fiscal year 21?
I think I have it. Is it, see, I'm looking at.
It wasn't attached.
Adjustment of budget for 2021. Is that the one you're talking about?
Well, the other commissioners are wanting to see, a comparison from where they began with the budget in 21 to where they ended with their budget in 21 and comparing it to the percentage cuts to see if it's doable. So you don't have this report, but I can email it.
You said go.
What email? What's the email?
Which Ralph, or which email do you want to send to, Ralph?
The G,
The
whatever,
G,
the G.
GSRCOA at Gmail.
SA, is that what it says?
COA.
Very good, yeah.
Huh?
I guess that's not gonna work here anyway.
GSR,
COA.
COA.
At Gmail.
I'm gonna go grab these off the printer. I'll be right back.
Everybody else got their login information for the updated email server, right?
Yeah, I can get in from the website, I just was having issues with the app.
I've been hearing that. I've had issues as well. What the ultimate goal is, moving on that, is once everybody at least has their email, and if it's not working, obviously you don't have your email, is to download the full package to the actual Surface. That way you have the actual app and not the online version. That's the best.
If right now you're expecting me to remember passwords, that's not a long one.
There's a place to save it, you can write it down as well.
What's writing stuff down, what's that?
Type it in, save it, OneNote, I mean, there's a few things.
Okay, I'm still wrestling. Would it be confusing or feasible or hard to do 10 hours in each place?
It could. The issue with that as well, as I can't pay the position what I would at the library. It'd be a small reduction as well.
Oh,
So, it's confusing. It's not an easy situation, but again, I'd rather do that than completely cut somebody. We've been fortunate to date where I don't believe we cut anybody completely. It's been down to part-time or a transfer to another department, and that's common, it's common practice. We've consulted with the attorney on it, we've gone through everything we could to try to make it the best we could.
I don't know, it just bothers me because I know we had that YMT tour that I took when I went to the Rose Parade. And I know they stopped here this summer and took people to the museum. And then, like I say, that's one of our school field trips that we get to go to because we can walk to it.
So I don't want to make it sound we're shutting everything down. We're still providing that operating budget. And I really believe whether it's partnering with the college and have somebody doing work study, whether it's reaching out to United Way, I've had talks with Scott, that there's different volunteer programs that you have a consistent volunteer base. And I know it's hard in Tick and Carry because for the most part, it's the same volunteers doing everything everywhere.
Right.
And I think we just need to tap into a larger pool of volunteers. And if there's some kind of grant funding that could give them some kind of stipend, I don't know if that's legal, if they're able to do that. But we have to approach different avenues. At least be open to different opportunities. Again, it isn't ideal at the other places. They're not open as many hours as they'd like to either, but the suggestions.
Thank you.
Reference that.
And so if the,
How will you pass that down?
Yeah.
Shannon, you'll go for the attachments. Okay, so again, like if we're looking at executive, third one down, they started off with a expense budget of $621,000. $927. They finished at $406,635. So that means they had savings. So if we go back to the cuts, cutting them 2% would take their budget down to $607,565.
So they saved $200,000 last year.
Yes, sir.
So would it be so bad to cut them to 500,000 instead of 607? You know, that's still giving them that almost $100,000 to play with from what they used the year before.
Do I need to turn the air conditioner off if that's what's bothering me?
No, it's always this time of day. I don't know
Okay.
why. At this
Now,
time
I
of
was starting
day,
to get
it just hits
my
me.
allergies.
I don't know why. Well, so for the executive side also, remember it has the 100,000 for capital outlay in there. So if it doesn't get spent, it looks really good on them. So it's in there again for 100,000. We only spent almost 40,000, which we have more coming this fiscal year for still more of the plateau services, right?
Correct.
So, let me see, where else did they have some savings? So it was salaries was the other part for that. Based on their personal schedule. I'm trying to see what else. I know there was, oh, that's it. I was thinking of the election expense, but that's in legislative. I don't know. What do you think, Mark?
Even if it was another, cut another 50,000 off of it, that's still giving that playroom. I hate to use that term when we're trying to cut a budget, but, I don't know, I'm asking y'all, I don't work up here, I'm just sitting on the bench,
So-
but
What I will tell you is that whatever the personnel schedule is, that's what I'm presenting to DFA, and I have to send that with it. So if some of that is, a vacant position in there, then you could be looking at trying to cut something like that versus an actual expense.
like I said, we're not filling those vacant positions.
Unless it's like a very essential position, police departments, EMS. Again, we've been pretty frugal, and Rochelle's been drowning in stuff because she's having to do everything right now.
No, I
There's
understand
another
that.
position there that would come out, I guess that's finance, but on the executive side, we have some positions open that haven't been filled yet. Right now, we'll have a vacancy in the police department, we have a vacancy in fire EMS, and those all come out of executive, which would, well, not all of them, but which could eventually put ourselves in a spot, not budgeting for that.
What caused the $200,000 savings in last year? It couldn't have been COVID.
It was
Part of it-
salaries is what I'm saying.
Part of it was COVID,
salaries.
part of it was salaries, part of it was not, like I said, the vacancies help. But if we could actually get back to full staff again, we wouldn't have that savings.
Well, when are we planning on going back to full staff?
Which is, that's true, but that would be out of a different line item.
Who's been down through positions?
It's hard to get any retainage, and again, that's, what we're doing now is part of a bigger plan. I don't want to get tunnel vision. It's in an effort to pay employees what they're worth.
Right. And I also, so when it comes to executive and legislative, a lot of the expenses are shared between the two. So for example, let's take the attorney fees. If something comes up and that goes over budget on the attorney's fees, I kind of look at executive, see if, because they have some lines in there that I use to cover some of those expenses. So I understand what you're saying. You would really be touching personnel if you were trying to cut more.
And I thought this, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to say it or not, but I'll go ahead and say it because I think it's the perfect time. There's certain reasons why we're advised by the attorney, or I have an advisement based on my best knowledge at the time. When we continue to fight things that may not be worthy of fighting, one thing that comes up to mind is the thousands of dollars that we would spend on the houseboat. The other is the thousands of dollars that we have already spent on Second Street with legal fees. And this is something, it's important. We hear our citizens, we want to support them. And that's where that money comes from. And if we continue to do that, we're digging ourselves in a deeper and deeper hole. Attorney fees on cheap. The hours and the effort that goes into fighting those things gets quite costly. So
Thing is though, we haven't spent any money on getting that boat out of there. Well, I have.
we
The city
have,
has.
just as far as attorney's fees is.
I thought we hadn't started that yet.
We did with the previous attorney, we haven't started with the new attorney yet. So, again, is it worth it to the city to spend $5,000, and that $5,000 maybe could be put towards salary for someone at the museum? Can we put that $5,000 to the minimal cut we did at recreation to allow more for our children? I think money could be better spent in other locations. But again, that's just my advisement. It's up to the commission ultimately. I'm here to do as directed.
That is something that we should discuss later on. I don't think we should do comparison right now. Right now, we got to focus the budget. And actually, if we start doing that, we get out of focus. We stay on the budget and go to the other part. Because we hadn't really discussed what we want to do. We discussed it once, and there's a lot more behind that incident than just the $5,000. So we should discuss that separately. Just stay with the budget.
On the finance side, I see you presented a 2%. I'm reading it right, there's an increase on there, is there?
Where it's an increase on
I'm
finance.
showing that you started out last year at 409, and you're projecting it at 458.
Where do you see 450?
Oh, that would be, again, so I'm utilizing the tab that has with all the salary increases, so I'm going from that budget number.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going, because I put in a flat budget with the salary increases, so it took it to 468,000. So my budget was 409 with the salary increases, takes it to 468. Then taking 2% off of that takes it down to 458. And again, I finished at 359.
You're down multiple positions.
I'm down multiple positions.
There's a, back to the backstory.
So let me just ask this, Mayor Pro Tem. So what exactly, by wanting to go line by line, what is it that you're trying to get to here? Like, do you not like the deficit of 417?
No, I love the
You
deficit of
don't like the
417.
percentage like museum at 7 and planning at 5? Do we want to change those numbers around?
No,
Oh,
it wasn't me that wanted to go line by line.
no, I don't want to go line by line.
No.
But the question was it doable? So I wanted to show you
Yeah,
the difference.
that's right.
That's why.
That's what I'm getting at, seeing if,
Yeah.
you know, what we're requesting that we raise it to, and then raising it and then cutting it.
And again, like we've said though also, is we're gonna try to, like, if you decide as a commission that you wanna stick with this budget right here, with the $417,000 deficit, and I'm gonna use the museum, for example, and we cut them $3,000, but then something comes up and they have to have it. Again, your general fund department, we have to come, we have to talk about it, and we'll make the amends where we need to at the end of it. So it's not, this is what I need to present to DFA, and I need to make you guys happy, and I need to make DFA happy. So that's where I'm at.
Considering the struggles that we're gonna have regardless of where we're at, I think the 617 is a good step in the right direction. One that takes care of our staff and gets it.
And yes,
Yes.
no employees are losing their job, which is a win-win for everybody.
The cost of living.
It helps us build up our cash reserves, which is what we're also wanting to get to, so that we will have money eventually for the equipment and other expenses down the road. But I also have to make DFA happy, so.
Right.
And their concern is our general fund, that's always their concern. As it should be.
I guess we can always pray for.
Now, we can also, in line
increase
with-
the GRTs.
you, don't ever bank on GRT, right? I mean, if it's great, but don't think it's gonna be great every year.
I'm
So
sure the last to get it.
in line with, going over budgets with department heads every quarter, we can also move around. So for example, if library is hurting and let's say animal control has some money, I mean, there's still general fund. So at the end of the day, it all comes out of the same pot of money. So some may be overspent, some may be underspent, and at the end, that's how
It offsets.
it all comes together. So that's why I keep saying, if they're gonna have to have it and they need it to do their job, it's gonna happen for them.
It's just not gonna be obligated to
Right.
where it can't be easily accessible.
Exactly.
That's
And
what,
it's
that was
not
my
gonna
thought
be-
process from the very beginning.
It's not gonna be there for, maybe frivolous spending at the end of the year.
We're not
we're all-
hiring anybody up.
Everybody has to tighten their belts and try to make some cuts where they can.
So is it reachable? Absolutely. If enough things go wrong, like I said, if we were to cut that extra 100,000 out of executive, we won't have that to finish the upgrades in plateau. We won't have that if something else goes sideways. You want a little bit of an nest egg there just in case, worst case scenario, but we're tightening down a little bit to make that nest egg a little bit smaller.
And in legislative, so, previous finance director and myself, we all, I tried to carry it over for as long as I could for the, contingency for emergencies. It used to be 400,000. In an effort to try to reduce the deficit, at one point it got taken down to 290,000. So from 400 to 290,000. So
Just
we don't
out of,
wanna take that off either because it's there for that in case
just
somebody
out
has
of
a
curiosity on the judicial, that covers the municipal judge, right? So we're gonna have a little bit in our pocket from that the next couple.
Right.
Yeah, we'll have that small savings from there, and that's what we've banked on in the past. I mean, we've been very fortunate that we've, to my knowledge, the past 5 years or 4 years, we've ended up favorable at the end of the budget. But again, that encompasses everything, including our utilities that help us out. And I mean, we're really focusing on general fund because that's what hurts us the most. But Rochelle and I have talked about, and I think it's brought up in the previous meeting, we're starting to get pretty thin on the sanitation and wastewater side of things. Water's been good because they go up 4% each fiscal year. The other two go up 2% fiscal year. So we flirted with changing that resolution to be amended to potentially go 3s across the board. That way, water comes down a little bit, and then wastewater sanitation is good to keep up with it. Because if not, I believe we ended up,
So wastewater, we projected them to receive 1.2 million in revenue from the billings, and they received 1.1 million. So it was $100,000 loss for wastewater, and wastewater really cannot afford, I mean, they had other revenues come in, but the billing is their main source of revenue, and they cannot afford to take that loss with that big project coming up. Sanitation, to get every little bit of money sanitation gets, goes to open up a brand new cell. At one point, cells were $1 million. I can imagine how much more they are now with everything else going up.
which we are due, and we actually have a meeting scheduled soon to start talking to the engineer about selling before. So that's,
So we project them to receive 800,000, and they received 760,000. So they were short about 30,000. Not such a big hit, but wastewater was a big hit.
and it comes full circle. This is why, again, we're not being tacky as a city, but that's why we can't have these free updates at the landfill. A, it takes up airspace, which is money, and if we're already having a shortfall, then that's a double loss for us. So it's not that we're being mean, it's not that we don't want to support our community, it's the fact that we can't afford to do it.
Can't have what?
The free
Oh,
days.
freedom days. I wish we had a place we could recycle. That'd take a whole lot of business out of it.
I
Well,
tried
remember
when I
one
was-
time we had that
Yes.
dumpster at the high school, wasn't it?
Yes.
And everybody started dumping their things.
Then they dump their trash in.
Illegally dumping it
Is
in.
that
I tried to reestablish that again, when I was in community development. I didn't have the most support, from higher levels. But again, we kind of burned our bridge when we received that funding last time, and then it just kind of fell through the city and continue it. So we got funding from the state at that time, and the state wasn't as supportive the second go around because we didn't keep our promise or obligation the first time. But those are all little things that help, and that, believe it or not, a recycling program helps airspace, which now in return, we save money because we're not filling that cell as quickly. So there's always a method behind all this madness to try to make it a better place. It's just,
Well, and we used to take the trash from Santa Rosa, and then we started filling up our cells faster. And then, in fact, I think it was when we weren't ready for the new cell, it wasn't done, then they started transferring it somewhere else. So then, yes, sanitation lost the revenue, but then we weren't filling up the cell as fast. So,
Yeah,
and just because we're not talking to about all the departments at one time doesn't mean there's other stuff going on. It's always going a million miles an hour. For example, we've recently talked about the convention center and going up on alcohol prices. It's very, very, I don't know the right word, I guess courteous of us that we only charge the amount that we do for certain things. And it's time to change. As inflation goes up, we have to move along with it. If not, we're gonna stay stagnant. So with
the
that,
rent,
there's more money to go back into the convention center. There's more money for upgrades. There's more money for promotional side.
Right.
So just because we don't talk about it constantly doesn't mean we're not working on things to make those departments better as well.
so, again, we're starting general fund, with the 3.2 million, almost 3.3 million in cash reserves, with the $418,000 deficit. If it happened that way, we would end cash reserves at almost 2.9 million. So, there's still a little loss, but then again, we could have the gain, we have salaries, everyone continues to be real
I
frugal.
don't know if we
We will
do
get
807,000, it's almost $1 million that comes out of it.
Say worst case scenario, we don't make it up and we spend exactly as projected, then that well runs dry quick. That's 400,000 here, 400,000 next year, or however we project next year, it could go bad in a hurry. We're just trying to be self-sufficient, being realistic, pay employees what they're worth, get funds out to those departments that need it for the things they need it. And
And next year we have another 50-cent raise.
another 50-cent raise, so that's a hit. Are we gonna be able to afford to?
Para is also going up next year, right?
Para's
And
going
that's
up.
on us, not on the employee?
Right.
Or is it the employee?
I think they have a slight bump as well,
But we do too.
but we,
Yes.
We've been lucky with COVID.
the next 2 years.
My expectations are health insurance for employees will go up, or to the city across the board will go up by, we usually project about 4 or 5%. This year, I think they were lenient because of the COVID situation. So again, there's certain things that didn't go up this year that we could guarantee more than likely it's gonna go up next year. So that's why we're trying to stay proactive and ahead of it, to take little bites instead of going, well, we're not gonna cut much this year, so next year we're gonna take a big hit. So it's just being proactive, little steps. This didn't happen overnight, it's not gonna be fixed overnight, and we just gotta do what we can.
okay.
Thank you for gathering all those numbers and going through and making those
Especially with
cuts.
some of the stuff you've been
I
going
know.
through.
We do appreciate the hours you're putting in on this and know it's been hard. It's hard on all of us. No, we don't want you to cry. Mess up your allergies.
It's allergies.
Yeah, my eyes are sweating.
So do we need anything else on this?
Do you have any other questions about it?
I'll go line by line. So I'm just kidding.
No. I
I
think
put
you,
that in the email yesterday, you should have done that yesterday.
I got it.
I think you've done a great job. I know it's not been easy. So. We all want our special things to not happen, so, but
Trust me,
We
the
do,
perfect
and
world-
that's, like we said, as we go through, we'll make
Yeah.
changes as we need to, or, but at the end of it, the departments are gonna be taken care of, just like they always are. We'll find it somewhere.
And I mean, with the recent surge of people moving into town, I mean, that all help, so.
And find a place to live, that's the only
But I mean,
problem.
unfortunately, we can't project what might happen.
Yeah.
We can only project what the trend shows.
So a budget's not an easy thing. It's very difficult. There's so many variables. Like I said, GRT could be amazing next year, and like the mayor said, we had a conversation with DEC, the housing situation is a tough situation.
It is.
The college president was speaking of bringing high caliber employees into this location, but there's nowhere for them to live. So,
A lot of the houses have been bought up, but Commissioner Moya brought something up that actually rings true. There's a lot of houses, and some of them may not be in a lot of shape, but what Commissioner Audius has done with one of his is he's gone in and he's upgraded it, and if you've seen the pictures, it looks very nice. And that might encourage some of these homeowners, I can sell my house now, instead of getting it for $10,000, they go in there and put a little bit of money in there and they can sell. So there's houses there, they just need to be upgraded. Maybe that will this will start encouraging some of the homeowners to upgrade those houses they're not even renting right now.
Well, your sister-in-law's a plumber,
Sister-in-law.
the one that lives next door to me. Are they
Oh.
married? She
No,
says she
they're
flips houses, so,
No. it won't.
I don't know. I'm just seeing out there working away.
Okay, okay. So, there's no other questions on the budget? I guess we'll go on to ordinances and resolutions. So first is the resolution 2021-22, amending the finance policy, and we did talk about that. Does anyone?
So you want to raise the minimum to 20,000 and.
20%.
20%.
Oh, yeah, 20% with no cap.
With no cap.
and I would recommend looking into the opportunity of a cap in the future, just so we're not going
I bet you.
over, just so it's checks and balances, but,
So if we put it in the resolution to say with no cap at this point, but with future, we may put in a cap.
Maybe to be reviewed
Right,
every year
right.
possibly.
Yeah. Okay.
I just don't want to
Cap
put
on the
us,
radar.
Cap at 20,000,
No, 20%.
20%.
20%.
But not a
that's
cap.
the minimum.
It's not a cap, that's the minimum, 20%.
Because the current cap is at 25%.
No. The current cap is, cap.
The cap is
Okay, yeah.
25%.
The current minimum is 15, right? Okay.
We talked about a lot since we talked about this last year.
Really?
So for us to pass the budget as discussed today, that would put it at a 57%. So if we went anything underneath 57 as a cap, that deficit just increases.
Right.
So we just gotta be aware of that.
Well, I mean, if we're taking small steps in the right direction, so I think raising that up the additional 5% and reviewing it next year, I think that would be appropriate.
Any other questions, discussion?
No.
Okay, so I would entertain a motion.
Madam Mayor, I'll make a motion that we amend the financial policy to reflect with a minimum of 20% with no cap to review annually from this point.
I'll second that.
Okay. Roll call, please.
Chris, your motion for
Yes. Todd, second.
Commissioner Villanueva? Commissioner Arias?
Yes.
Mayor Litchfield?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Duplantis?
Yes.
Commissioner Moya?
Okay, so next on the agenda is resolution 2021-23, the fiscal year 2021 final budget adjustments.
So the final year-end budget adjustments, again, were favorable. So I believe it's
2021.
Okay, so adjustments were So the total budget adjustments that I made was, 2,659,688. And again, that was favorable. And these are the budget adjustments that I have to submit to DFA by the 31st, so I would expect your approval.
Any questions or discussion on the 2021 final budget adjustments?
Okay.
Okay, I would entertain a motion to approve this.
I make a motion, we approve resolution 2021-23, the fiscal year 2021 final budget adjustments.
I'll second.
Okay, roll call, please.
Commissioner Arias,
Yes.
Mayor Litchfield,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Duplantis.
Yes.
Commissioner Moya,
Yes.
Commissioner Villanueva.
Okay, so next on the agenda is Resolution 2021-20-24, fiscal year 2021, end of year financials.
So, going over the budget, we started off the fiscal year in a deficit of 631,945. We are ending the fiscal year favorable, at 2,513,974. That's, I'm sorry, I gave you the wrong number. 2,612,190,000. Those are the final, actual numbers. The ending cash, so we started the year. We started the year with a beginning cash overall for the whole city of 9,492,344. We are ending with an overall cash of 12,977,196. That will be my beginning cash number for the fiscal year 2022. And I'm just reading this because it's on the on the resolution. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them or ask for your approval.
Any questions on the Resolution 2021-24, the fiscal year 2021, end of year financials? I think we discussed them pretty good, so. All right, I would entertain a motion to approve this resolution.
Madam Mayor, I'll make a motion that we approve resolution 2021-24.
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Mayor Litchfield,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Duplantis.
Yes.
Commissioner Moya,
Yes.
Commissioner Villanueva, Commissioner Arias.
Yes.
Okay. Next one is resolution 2021-25, fiscal year 2021-2022 final budget. This will be submitted to the DFA.
Yes, Mayor. Again, have to submit the final budget by July 31st. As we've discussed earlier, I want to make sure, so we're going to go with the percentage cuts tab with a deficit of 417,617.
Okay. Any more discussion on this budget? I'd entertain a motion to accept resolution 2021-25, the 2021-22 final budget.
I'll make a motion, we accept resolution 2021-25, fiscal year 2021-22 final budget.
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Mayor Pro Tem Duplantis.
Yes.
Commissioner Moya,
Yes.
Commissioner Villanueva, Commissioner Arias,
Yes.
Mayor Litchfield.
Yes.
Be okay.
I know. Okay, I guess
Thank
next
you.
is entertain a motion to adjourn.
If I may make a quick announcement, just in a public meeting, it's no secret, but my wife is in her last couple weeks of her pregnancy. So in any future commission meeting, I will have my phone on and I may need to depart at any time, so.
We understand.
Thank you.
I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll second.
Roll call.
You get disconnected.
Commissioner Moya?
Yeah.
Commissioner Villanueva?
Do not stir the-
Commissioner Arias?
Yes.
Mayor Litchfield?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem DeFrancis?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for the work.
Yeah, I know you had it rough.
But now I gotta go put it in the DFA system, so.
Okay,
I'm not done.